Hello and welcome to our webinar, Random House Children's Books Fall 2021 Preview. I'm Julia Smith, Senior Editor, Books for Youth at Booklist. Before we begin, I'd like to go over some technical details. The audience is in listen-only mode, but we welcome any questions you may have. On the bottom of your screen is a toolbar with a section for Q&A. If you have a question or need technical assistance, simply click Q&A and type your message into the box that appears. We will do our best to respond to all tech-related questions and pass along all other questions to today's panelists so they can follow up with you after the webinar. Also, Booklist will now be offering closed captioning on all webinars. To enable or disable captions on your screen, please look for and click Live Transcript on the icon at the bottom of the toolbar mentioned above. And from there, you can select Show or Hide Subtitles from the menu that appears. If you choose to enable subtitles, you can adjust the size of the captions at any time by selecting Subtitle Settings. Last but not least, links to today's slide presentation and title list were included in the reminder email you received from Zoom 1 hour ago. To download them, please open that email, scroll to the bottom, and click on the links located there. You can also download the slides and title list by copying the URLs on this screen into your web browser. We have a great program in store for you today. For the first half of the webinar, we'll hear presentations from today's featured authors, followed by a panel discussion. In the second half of our webinar, we'll hear from the wonderful team at Random House Children's Books, who will be showcasing upcoming titles from their fall list. Let's begin from hearing from our wonderful authors, starting with Tina Kane. Tina grew up in downtown New York City during the 70s and 80s, surrounded by artists and writers and musicians, and she draws much of her creative inspiration from that era. The founder and director of Writers in the Schools, Rhode Island, Tina also currently serves as the Poet Laureate of Rhode Island, where she lives with her husband and 3 children, who are also major sources of inspiration. Tell us a little about your book, Tina.
Hi, thank you. Can everyone hear me? I think so. Thank you so much for having me. My book is called ALMA PRESSES Play, and I'm really happy to have this book out into the world. I feel that I put my whole self into the writing of it. It's a novel in verse for young adult readers, probably 11 and up, although I feel that an adult could actually read this book too and enjoy the constellation of characters. The main character's name is Alma Rosen. She is a half Chinese girl who is kind of a quintessential New Yorker, half Chinese, but with grandparents on the other side of her family who are Polish Jews in Brooklyn. And she is growing up in downtown New York, living in the East Village, attending middle school in the West Village, and consequently has 2 sets of friends. And the book takes place in 1982. She is 13 years old, the year right before she enters high school. And it is also a pivotal year in her personal life where it seems that her family is starting to come apart. She's an only child with her mom and her dad. Her dad is a New York City cab driver. And I feel that this book, I'm a poet, and one of my collections of poetry, Once More with Feeling, is very much a New York book and a downtown New York book, which is also where I grew up. And I'm also half Chinese, and my dad was also a New York City cab driver for many years. So it's on the face of it, there are a lot of correspondences with my personal story, and I certainly stole moments from my own life and my own experiences with the duality of being biracial, but East and West Village, East and Western cultures, 2 sets of grandparents from very different cultural perspectives and backgrounds, and 2 sets of friends. But I also feel that downtown New York City during that time, which was like the advent of hip hop, early hip hop and punk rock music, I feel that the city itself is also a little bit of a character. The cityscape that I borrowed from my poetry book and transplanted to this book. I use a lot of song lyrics in the book, And in the early part of my career, I was an English and French teacher in middle and high school. And I think my middle school English teacher came on, and I use a lot of vocabulary definitions to introduce the poems. And school certainly the kind of the mythology that she's learning in her 8th grade English class and other aspects of school writing make their way into the story. I think that it being a novel in verse makes it a little bit different than a standard fiction story, in the sense that as a poet, I work largely in moments, except that for this novel in verse, I was trying to tell the story of a girl's life. But I wanted the story to be really interior, so that it's coming of age in the sense that she's growing up, but also coming into her own voice. So I don't feel that the narrative arc is quite the same as it would have been had I not been telling it as a series of poems. I kind of see it as a constellation with all these threads kind of pulled out from different influences in her environment that she weaves into this kind of fabric that she then steps into herself towards the end of the book. And those threads are coming from different influences, different friend groups, different cultural settings within her own small life downtown.
Thank you so much. We will now move on to Karla Arenas Valenti. Karla writes stories for and about kids, taking readers on journeys steeped in magical realism and philosophical questions. Her storytelling is heavily influenced by her Mexican heritage and layered with ideas and concepts she's picked up in her many travels around the world. She currently resides in the Chicagoland area with her husband and 3 kids, 2 cats, and hundreds of books. Karla writes picture books, is the creator of the My Super Science Heroes series, and LOTERÍA is her debut middle grade novel. Please tell us about your book, Karla.
Hi, and thank you for that introduction. Thank you for having me here. I'm so excited to be a part of this panel and share LOTERÍA with everybody. LOTERÍA has been described as a vibrant fantasy that's a little bit Coco, a little bit Caraval, very much influenced by the tradition of magical realism in Mexican storytelling. And I have to thank my editor for that excellent little blurb. I think it sums up a lot of what I was trying to accomplish when I wrote the book. Briefly, the book is set in Oaxaca City, Mexico. It's a story that actually explores themes of free will and determinism, packaged in a middle grade novel. The story takes place through the life of 11-year-old Clara, who becomes the pawn in a literal game of fate. The game is Lotería, which is a little bit like the American bingo. And the game is being played by Life and Death, who are 2 characters that feature in the novel. And as they play the game, they discuss free will versus determinism. And every card they flip reveals a pictograph, an image. And that image unfolds in Clara's life. And it propels her forward on this adventure. So it could be a rose, it's a scorpion, it's a tree, it's a spider. And as Clara goes on her adventure and as all of these things start to happen in her life, Life and Death are discussing whether there's such a thing as free will or not. And you see that also play out in Clara's life and the choices that she makes, wondering whether they're driven by the turn of the card or whether they're driven by her choices. And eventually Clara ends up in the hidden kingdom of Las Posas, where she has to find and rescue the little cousin Esteban, who's been taken. And throughout it all, she's making these choices, leading to a twist, I hope, a conclusion at the end that leaves readers wondering whether there is free will or determinism. And the goal of the story, aside from just telling a really great adventure, which I hope people will enjoy and really inviting readers to enter into these philosophical concepts, was also to introduce readers to Mexican storytelling, not just a Mexican character, not just in a 100% Mexican setting, but exploring themes that are very typical to growing up in Mexico, themes like death, which is not handled as a frightening specter or something to be feared, but death in the body of Katrina, that is her name. She's a beautiful woman. She's smart, she's wise, she's kind, she's generous. So I wanted to give readers an opportunity to really delve into a different way of looking and understanding and thinking about these big concepts. So that's a little bit of a nutshell of my book.
Thank you very much for that. Sounds amazing. We'll get into some of those themes a little bit more in the next portion, but for now, we're going to move on to our last author pairing, which will be Lee Durfey-Lavoie and Veronica Agarwal. Veronica is a cartoonist and illustrator from New York City. She graduated from SVA with a bachelor's in cartooning and loves plants, summertime, dogs, and her 3 cats. Her work focuses on mental health, coming of age stories, and friendship. Just Roll With It is her debut graphic novel. And Lee is a college dropout who was able to find a career in writing, and he loves role-playing games and spending time with his cat. And this is also his debut graphic novel. Thank you for joining us, Veronica and Lee.
Thanks so much for having us. It's wonderful to be here. So Just Roll With It is a sort of love letter to our past selves, to my younger siblings who might be dealing with some of these issues, and to hopefully tons of kids who, after reading this, feel a little less alone dealing with the various mental health struggles that kids deal with. So Just Roll With It focuses on a young girl named Maggie, who you can see right there on the cover. She is entering middle school for her first year, and she's dealing with what she finds out eventually is OCD. And her way of dealing with the pressure and the struggle of that anxiety is using a D20, which is like a dice that you would see in tabletop games. And it comes from the fact that she really loves that game that she plays. And so she uses that dice to help her make those decisions that are pretty scary for her. And along the way, she makes friends, which is a hard thing to do in middle school. She tries to measure up to her older siblings. And yeah.
She deals with there's a dragon or a monster at her school, and she deals with how to approach that and how to deal with that while also juggling anxiety of like everyday life and things like that.
Yeah, so she's in the midst of dealing with all these new and scary and complicated emotions, while at the same time, outside on the school grounds is something haunting, sort of, you could say, the school, terrifying some of the other kids and especially her. And like we mentioned, throughout it all, she's dealing with anxiety and pressure and school and making friends. And is she being awkward? Is she being weird? All of that. And so we're very excited for people to read it. Do you have anything else? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Turn on my camera here because we're going to move into our quick Q&A part. Let's make sure that I've got everyone on here. Yes, very good. Let's just start with a question for everyone. And we've got such a great range of stories here with you all, from middle grade fantasy, rooted in a card game, the novel in verse, with like historical roots for our audience, though thinking of the 80s as historical fiction is sometimes a little shocking to me. And the historical novel, or the graphic novel that takes on social anxiety through the use of a dice game. Each of these stories are unique, and they use very unique storytelling devices. How do you feel your different storytelling devices best serve the story you were telling? And you can either jump in or I can pick a name.
I'll jump in and just
Thanks, Dina.
Sure. So, it's interesting. This was a challenge for me, and it was a wonderful experience to write this book, because as a poet, I had to keep my eye on telling a story, but I also knew that because when I write poetry, it's a speaker. Sometimes it's a first person speaker, but there is that remove that I may be the poet's voice drawing on personal experience to write the poem. But I don't think of the speaker as a character. So with this novel in verse, I was looking to tell a story through poems, but it was a very interesting experience to have the characters emerge and have that fictionalized presence appear to me in poems. The process for me was a lot more visual than it is in my poetry. Although I think I use many visual, I use a lot of imagery and visual kind of devices or tools. But in the writing of this book, I swim a lot at the local Y, and so I would read a scene and then swim laps and try to visualize what was going to happen next. And it was amazing, just as a writer, to be dealing with characters and have them take form almost before my eyes. And what's interesting too is that for me, the main character is Alma, the 13-year-old protagonist. And then she has a little crew of friends on her block. So she has friends in the West Village, which is more Tony kind of middle-class environment. And then she lives on a pretty rough block with a lot of issues. And she has her friends from the block that she lives on. And, because there was mythology in this book, I was also thinking of Greek chorus. And so for me, it was always a balance of, I didn't want those characters I wanted her to stay central, kind of like the largest star in a constellation. And for the other friends in her crew to be present but peripheral, and to just be kind of sources of information. Because really the story is about her looking around, looking at the kind of the people on her block and the issues on her block, and then the lack of issues in the other neighborhood, and the kind of inequities and the injustices in small ways that she sees, and the different sides of her family and their respective histories as Jews living in Brooklyn or Chinese living in Chinatown, and the cultural histories that they bring. She's always, she'd probably end up being a poet, but she's always pulling information from the outside and then trying to assimilate it into an understanding of how she is going to step forward in the world. So for me, it was very different than writing poems, although it was extremely satisfying to set up scenes in poem form and then kind of have them unfurl like a film. It was a cinematic experience in my brain.
I love that. Karla, would you like to go next?
Sure, of course. So in my case, I think there's a lot of similarities probably in the way that we all use these different storytelling devices. In my case, I started with this question. I have a background in philosophy, so it was prompted by the big question, right? Is there such a thing as free will? So I brought in life and death to debate the question on paper. And I didn't know how it would be resolved. So I was sort of along for the journey as well. And then I started to write Clara's story, but I was actually playing a game of Lotería as I wrote the story. So I would flip a card, and then based on whatever was on that image, that would be my next plot point. And so in a way, it was sort of like a meta experience, right? Because I too was bound by these same free will versus determinism questions. I didn't know whether the scorpion would come up or not. And when it did, I had to roll with it. I had to do something with that. And so it was really actually, it was such an interesting experience for me because I felt like my character. I felt like I was in the book taking this ride, trying to figure out how much free will I actually had. And, you know, as authors, we sort of get to a point where we kind of know how the book is going to end. And then I was surprised that it didn't end the way that I had thought. And I got to the climax and my character did something completely unexpected that surprised everybody, including me. And it just was so rewarding because it sort of legitimized the question. It legitimized the exploration. And there are no resolutions. I don't mean to suggest that I figured out whether there is free will or not. But it was just the process of asking the questions and the process of flipping the cards felt like it feels to be caught up and swept up in fate, and how much of it was my choice and how much of it was driven by destiny and how much of it was my kids playing with the cards while I wasn't looking and shuffling them around. And then lo and behold, Clara's life goes in a completely different direction. So I didn't really set out to write it that way. It just, my father had come to visit and he brought a set of loteria for my kids to play with, and it happened to be on the table. But that's so much how life is, right? Sometimes just the right thing comes at the right time and we run with it and something magical happens. So it felt, I guess to sum up, it felt very meta and very authentic, the experience that I went through and the experience that my character went through.
Amazing. Veronica and Lee.
Our book, Maggie uses the D20 dice to kind of help her decide if a choice that she's struggling, two options between, you know, if it's a good idea or a bad idea. And I feel like, you know, as someone who has anxiety myself and like suffers with OCD myself, like sometimes the biggest things are about, you know, I don't want to make the wrong decision. So it was kind of made sense for someone who's younger to see like a clear answer for that and use that to help her be like, well, if the dice says that it's a good idea, then it's a good idea, and I trust that, and that's just going to be the way that I follow it until it kind of stops working for me, and then she has to kind of confront that, you know, maybe this isn't the healthiest or best way for me to make my decisions, because at a certain point, you know, if you're re-rolling a bunch of times to get the answer you want, you know, that then it becomes like, oh, well, actually, I'm not really obeying fate. I'm just trying to construct it the way I want it to go. And then you kind of have to examine why you can't just make your choice that you want to go with from the beginning. And that's kind of where the introspection and like the examination of anxiety and the hold it has on you, and like why we need to kind of explore that within ourselves and make sure that, you know, we can have anxiety, but are we letting it make the decisions for us? Are we letting it run our lives in ways that are detrimental to us? Do you have anything else?
Yeah, I mean, you know, completely agree with that. And that, like, just, you know, sometimes you have coping mechanisms, and sometimes they're not the best. And to confront that in and of itself is like, is this thing that I'm doing that I rely on for safety to keep me almost alive not good for me anymore? Is that that feels dangerous? And there's so much of this that, like, in a way felt dangerous to write. As again, somebody with anxiety and depression and tackling all these things that I deal with, sometimes well, sometimes not, to really get like in there into your own core, and then to like reflect that, and then in a way that children could read it and not be terrified of, and hopefully find comfort and like reprieve in. It was kind of scary sometimes, because there were times where Maggie would do something or go through something, and I'm like, you know, that hurts to write, like that hurts for her to go through, but like, you know,
kind of
sometimes
like
you have to go through it.
Yeah, and
like,
also looking in the mirror a little bit too, you know, kind of like, oh,
Yeah.
I do that.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's me. That's why that's on that page.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that in there. It's definitely not fully autobio, but there are definitely things ripped right from both of our experiences growing up and dealing with all this emotion. And yeah, I mean, like the dice especially, like that little tiny thing that has so much weight over you, and you've always got it. She's always got it with her in her pocket, and you're always carrying this weight, this mental illness, this fear or anxiety with you all the time. And it's so small, but it makes such a huge impact on your everyday life and everyday decision.
Yeah, it's a really good metaphor for the anxiety as a whole, since it's something that's like, I've had, phobias and things where I've looked at them and I've been able to push through them. And when I'm on the other side, I'm like, that was not the huge scary thing that I thought it was. And I feel like we have a similar kind of thing going on here with the monster that's at the school and the dice as well, like how those things have such a huge hold, when in actuality, when you see them from the other side, it's just a dice, and it's just, whatever the thing is.
Thank you. Okay, I think we have time for about one question for each of you on each of your books, which works out because you did touch on some of the other things I was going to ask in your previous answers. So let's hop back to Tina, if that's all right. You already discussed sort of the differences in writing your poetry versus writing the novel in verse. But how do you persuade a teen that might be reluctant to pick up poetry or a novel in verse?
Well, I have been teaching poetry writing and writing to reluctant writers and poets in public schools for 25 years. So I think it's a lot easier actually to pick up a novel in verse if you're poetry averse than to pick up a book of poems if you're going to kind of be open to poems in general. I think, as I said, I kind of liken the process of writing this as a very visual process. And for someone who wanted to pick up my book, for example, I'd say, well, it really is a story told in moments and scenes, but kind of shot through a poet's sensibility, so that I may be seizing on details or images or musicality and language in a way that a fiction writer might be differently attuned to it. That's not to say that fiction, I love fiction, that the fictional sentence or paragraph or scene doesn't have poetic elements in it, but that a novel in verse, at least I think mine is, I feel that because I love film, and I used to make films when I was a kid, Super 8s. I feel that if it could be approached as more as a story told in a form rather than a book of poems. But I do think that, and I was conscious during the writing of it to try and make each poem self-contained enough that it could kind of stand on its own as a scene or as an emblem of a moment in the character's life. But I would say to propose it to a teenager as an excellent foray into having a story unfold in a way that's just different than a chapter book, more as like a moving tableau or an unfurling short.
Yeah, I love that. I love the visual imagery that you tied it to, and even like an album of
tracks. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny because at a certain point, when we were discussing titles, the idea of mixtape came up because the character is always wearing her Walkman. And I'm trying to explain to my children like how revolutionary the Walkman was. Like I got one for my 13th birthday, and I mean, it just changed everything because I could listen to music and be in my own world among other people. And to my children, it's just, they're kind of always carving out their personal space, with AirPods or and the cassette tape and rewinding it with a pencil on the bus, but all these different tactile things that are very specific to the setting of the book, 1982, but that are timeless and universal in some sense. But when we were thinking of the titles, we thought mixtape because it had to do with her mixed heritage and the mix up of her life and all these things. And then the fact that the way that the poems come together, the way a mixtape kind of has a vibe or tells its own story, and how you choose which songs go together in which order, that we could almost think of the book as a mixtape. But then my kids nixed it and they said, nah, mixtape as a phrase is played out, right? So I was always coming to them and saying, like, what do you think of this? And they'd say yes or no. So they had some real input in terms of vibe and content. But I do think that like a mixtape of poems almost is one way to think about it.
Thank you. All right, Karla, if you wouldn't mind talking to us a little bit about, and the librarians who are here are going to be talking to others about your book, about the game Lotería, because it is an actual game and not part of the mythology, really, of the book. So can you just sort of describe that a little bit to us?
Sure. And first I want to say I love that idea of the book being like a mixtape, and just that concept I think is so brilliant, a good way to capture novels in verse, because it is hard to think of them as a book of poems, for instance, but I think the way you captured it is beautiful. So anyway, that's sort of an aside, but yeah, Lotería is interesting. It actually originated in Italy and then traveled to Spain and then made its way over to Mexico in about the 1700s. It's very similar to American bingo. So you have your board, but instead of numbers, you have images, you have pictographs, and you have a deck of 54 cards, which I think in bingo, it's usually the little balls that are in a little tourney thing. Here it's a deck of cards, and each of those cards matches, the squares that would be on a board, on a tabla. And the tabla has 16 squares, so 4 and 4. And it's played similarly, where a card is flipped, and then you have the announcer, in Spanish it's el cantor, who calls out the card. And then based on whether you have it on your tabla or not, you might put a token, a kernel of corn or a black bean, a frijol, you put it on there. And the first person to get a row of 4, a row of 4, a row of 4, or some pattern that's predetermined will win. But it's actually a little bit more than that, because the cantor actually has a very unique role. When they pull the card, they don't just say the sun, they say the blanket of the poor. And it's a riddle or a poem. And actually, the cantor plays a special role because they sort of gain popularity based on how good they are at their poetry or at their riddle making. And it becomes a storytelling thing in itself, and a guessing game. And depending on the setting, if you have a family-friendly event, the riddles and the poems will be family-friendly. If you have an adult event, they might be a little bit more racy. You might have some political satire, commentary, and it's a whole thing. It's a whole culture about the cantor and how they call out this riddle. So that's a little bit of the history. As far as the cards, I think everybody, if you Google up Lotería cards, they're the typical iconic images. And those actually were initially made by a man named Don Clemente Gallo, who was a French businessman who moved to Mexico and purchased a manufacturing plant. So he would make processed food and cans and a whole bunch of things to produce, including the labels for the cans and calendars. And so in the 1800s, when they would create all of these, they'd create rations for soldiers. And so they also then started creating these little Lotería sets that they would send to the soldiers with all the prepackaged food so that they had something to play. And then when the soldiers came back home and they brought these games of Lotería with them for their families, they were a huge hit. And so it sort of evolved into just this pastime that's really beloved and played. I mean, you can play it in all sorts of ways. It can be just the church, you know, it can be my house, it can be at school. And the cards, you know, there's all sorts of different cards that you can make. You have your traditional ones that we see, but there's so many variations. And actually for our librarians and our teachers and our parents and our educators, I think a really fun project would be for the classes to make their own Loteria boards and their own Loteria cards. So for instance, if you're doing a session on historical figures, each card could be a different historical figure. And then it opens up plenty of opportunities to actually talk about the historical figure and, you know, play these games. It could be your classmates, it could be cultural icons. And so I think it's a fun way to bridge art and history, or art and, you know, social studies, or even your favorite characters from other novels that you've read. But yeah, that's a little bit about the history of Loteria. And I guess you can play it online now, but I think it's a lot more fun to play it in person.
Thank you so much. That's fascinating. All right. We've just got time for Veronica and Lee. And I could talk to you guys all day long. I wish we had more time. But for our final question here, let's just talk a little bit about your inspiration for putting this book together. Were there, because you have a really unique approach to the story, were you inspired by any graphic novels out there, or any middle grade novels in particular?
Well, two books that I am really inspired by is Real Friends and Best Friends. They're in the two, one after the other, by Shannon Hale and Leanne Pham. Just the way that they tackle, you know, children's problems and the anxiety in children is really inspiring, and really speaks to ways that I felt as a kid. And kind of reading it, I was like, I didn't even realize that I felt this way until I saw it reflected on the page, and I thought that was really incredible. Svetlana Chamakova also does a really great series about Berrybrook Middle School, and I remember someone talking to me about it and explaining that, you know, you have all of these child-sized problems, but she never makes them feel trivial in the way that she writes them. And I thought that was really fantastic. And I hope that we could have captured that in our book, because I think it's so, you know, it's interesting how far removed you can become as you get older, you know, from how big of a deal certain things seem to be, you know, when you're young and all that kind of thing. Then another one was In Real Life by Cory Doctorow and Jen Wang. They covered, you know, a really interesting back and forth between fantasy and reality of the kind of world it's in a computer game, and then how, you know, the things that the main character does in the computer game, how those affect her real life, and etc. And, you know, how she looks in the game versus how she looks in real life, and those kinds of things. And there's like a lot of interesting back and forth there. The Breakaways also does a really nice back and forth with that as well. But it's a little more abstract, which makes it really interesting. What about you? Was there any stuff that inspired the writing?
I do love all those books a lot. They're fantastic. I did basically refuse to read anything as I wrote the script, though.
I really tried to get him to read some of my inspirations, and he was like, I do not want to accidentally borrow anything. It was very considerate, very funny.
Yeah, so I basically didn't read anything for like a year. I wrote this. It had a bunch of stuff to catch up on afterwards. But you know, there's, you know, plenty of books that you know, remained with me as I wrote this.
Yeah, what stuff that like inspires you normally?
I think Svetlana's series and like Awkward, Brave. I think those books are fantastic. They stuck with me. You know, I actually, I've always really liked To Kill a Mockingbird, and it feels, in a way, completely unrelated, but it was such a moving experience for me, and how they talk about like Boo Radley and how you can infer what Boo Radley was like going through and how he was feeling as like the sort of scary monster character. who's also just a guy. And, you know, so that book always meant a lot to me. And I think I carried parts of that with me as I wrote this, and how you deal with, against like problems at school and problems, and, you know, obviously To Kill a Mockingbird talks about some really heavier stuff, but also like there is
perceptions as well, like
it's perceptions, and also there's this like scenes where they're at a school play and she's like dressed up as like a ham or a turkey leg or whatever it was, and like that's like a big moment, and so stuff like that. And less so books, but a thing that I definitely think about is I'm the oldest of 8. I have 7 younger brothers and sisters, and so all of them really influenced how I wrote the book, because I know one of my younger sisters was dealing with some heavier mental illness stuff as well, and it made me really think about like my own struggles with mental health, and how what I went through helped my mom deal with it later down the line when she was able to help my other siblings. And so I thought about that a lot more often than I actually really thought about any specific book was about, you know, a little cliche, a little
kind
whatever,
of creating
but
like
about
an olive branch for people who may not have that experience to draw from.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really loved getting a chance to talk to all of you, and can't wait to get a chance to read all of these books. We're going to move on to the next part of our presentation, and we will hear from Random House Children's Books team, Emily Duval, Natalie Caprossi, Shaughnessy Miller, Erica Stone, and Adrian Weintraub.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much to our authors for that wonderful conversation. I hope it inspires you to check out some of their amazing books. And myself and the school and library team are going to start to tell you about some fall titles coming up. And I'm going to jump in and start with picture books. And I'm going to start with some nonfiction selections that you must have for your collection. So just jumping right in. Justice Is. This is the perfect picture book to spark conversations about justice and historical figures who fought for and upheld justice with readers of all ages. In clear and simple language, Preet Bharara, former U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, explains what justice is and what it takes to achieve it for even the youngest readers. It draws on examples of historic justice seekers whose deeds best demonstrate those attributes by asking hard questions, keeping an open mind, and defending the truth. And using their voices and their bodies to fight injustice, such as Ida B. Wells, John Lewis, and many, many others. This timely book is perfect for exploring the concept of justice, inspiring young readers to fight for justice in their world and to remain hopeful that by standing together, it can triumph. Next slide, please. The Faith of Elijah Cummings. Congressman and civil rights advocate Elijah Cummings dedicated his life to public service. This is a comprehensive and visually stunning biography that details his humble beginnings and unwavering faith as he waged an endless battle for truth, justice, and equality. Carol Boston Weatherford and Laura Freeman marry words and images together beautifully in this picture book biography of the politician and civil rights champion Elijah Cummings. Highly, highly recommend this one. And moving on to the next slide. A Seat at the Table. This inspiring picture book biography about Nancy Pelosi shows her journey from the child of Baltimore's mayor to her marble ceiling shattering 4 terms as Speaker of the House, and includes the historic events of January 6, 2021 as well. A Seat at the Table depicts Speaker Pelosi's beginnings as she watched her mother work behind the scenes and stand by her father, the mayor of Baltimore, and then working behind the scenes herself in the early days of her career until a friend asked her to run for Congress. Young girls especially will be inspired by Nancy's journey and her commitment to using her voice to help others and to make sure women are heard in government. Back Matter also includes an exclusive interview with Nancy Pelosi herself. Next slide, please. Sister, Brother, Family. This is the first children's book by country singer, music legend Willie Nelson. Willie and his sister and bandmate Bobby Nelson tell the moving and inspiring story of their childhood and their lifelong bond, built on a love of music and unwavering support of family. Raised by loving grandparents in Depression-era rural Texas, their humble beginnings playing local shows to put food on the table started them on a remarkable path to global stardom. This is a story filled with details of their childhood in rural Texas, church socials, general stores, and town dances. They weave together an inspiring story of a long ago time. This is a great book to weave music into your history lessons and story times. Next slide, please. Abe Lincoln's Hat is one of my favorite styles of nonfiction storytelling. It utilizes interesting factoids and anecdotes weaved together to give a side of a well-known historical figure that people might not know. Like how Abe Lincoln came up with a trick involving his stovepipe hat to nudge his memory. Adapted from the Step Into Reading leveled reader of the same name, author Martha Brenner has revised and enriched her original text to include more historical material and resources for those who want to explore this captivating figure further. Illustrator Brooke Smart's clever art makes history more appealing than ever, including both humor and painful, hard-hitting American history. This new edition traces Lincoln's evolution into a compelling commander-in-chief during a contentious time in our history. And I will kick it over to Natalie, who's going to talk about some STEM titles.
Hi there, I'm Natalie, and I'm really excited to talk to you about picture books with STEM concepts, starting with Bach's Giant Leap. This is the first man on the moon, Neil Armstrong's only children's book. This nonfiction picture book recounts the entire epic history of the Earth and the moon, but through the observations of one very special narrator, a moon rock named Bach. From the moon's surface, Bach watches the Earth develop from afar until a strange creature scoops him up and brings him back to Earth. This awe-inspiring title by American hero Neil Armstrong and award-winning illustrator Graham Baker Smith is a must-read for those interested in STEM and space exploration. Next slide, please. From award-winning meteorologist and Today Show co-anchor Dylan Dreyer, Misty the Cloud, A Very Stormy Day is the first book in a sky-high series about how to deal with good days, bad days, and everything in between. Misty is a little cloud with big feelings, but with help from friends and family, Misty accepts that sometimes she's just going to be a little stormy, and it will always pass. Misty the Cloud is the perfect primer for talking about emotions, what they are, and how we move through them, in addition to being an excellent science resource for learning about the weather. Next slide, please. Big as a Giant Snail is a highly graphic nonfiction science book full of the biggest and weirdest animals in the world. Of course, there are the usual suspects, blue whales, polar bears, elephant seals, but others will take you by surprise. Filled with nonfiction facts and diagrams, this is the latest in Jess Keating's educational series on strange creatures, and is perfect for readers who love exploring the colossal world of critters. Jess Keating is a zoologist turned author, so this book will update readers on the latest animal findings, including animals that have only been recently discovered. And over to Shaughnessy.
Hi, my name is Shaughnessy Miller. I'm a library marketing coordinator, and I'm going to share some picture books that I think that we think have potential to be modern classics. So first up is This Is a Gift for You. A stunning companion to the best-selling and beloved The Wonderful Things You Will Be, this picture book celebrates how we say I love you, with gifts as heartfelt as a daisy, as magical as a dream, and as comforting as a place to belong. It is a poetic tribute to the simple joys of life and nature, and a reminder that the greatest gift we have is time spent together. This book is perfect for little ones who are looking for more magic, inspiration, and unconditional love from the pen and paintbrush of Emily Winfield Martin. Next slide. And next up, we have Uni the Unicorn in the Real World. Uni visits her best friend in the real world. Now everyone will know that unicorns exist, and that Uni is real after all. But when the little girl introduces Uni to her family and friends, they can't see the unicorn. Then, with the power of believing and Uni's magic horn, all the kids begin to see Uni and believe in magic. As the real world grows bigger, brighter and brighter, all kinds of other magical creatures appear, ending the book with the most dazzling array of imaginary creatures. Paris Rosenthal, the daughter of the late Amy Krauss Rosenthal, wrote this as a tribute to her mom. Next slide. Return of the Underwear Dragon. In this sequel to the hilarious picture book Attack of the Underwear Dragon, Sir Cole has the startling realization that the Underwear Dragon wasn't attacking the kingdom because he was disobeying the signs that said not to. The Underwear Dragon just couldn't read the signs. Once again, Sir Cole sets out on a valiant quest, this time to help the Underwear Dragon learn to read. But it's hard to teach a fire-breathing creature to read an actual book because he sets them all on fire. And when the Underwear Dragon finally succeeds, Sir Cole presents his star pupil with the perfect gift, gigantic alphabet underwear. Next slide. Tiny Cedric. In this hilarious and gorgeous picture book that feels like an instant classic, Tiny Cedric, King Me I, has banished anyone taller than him from his palace, which is everyone basically. The only ones left are the babies, and now they're in charge of the royal duties. How will Cedric cope? Will he become a kinder, gentler, bigger king? Next slide. The Creature of Habit. In this picture book debut from best-selling author Jennifer E. Smith and award-winning illustrator Leo Espinosa, a very big creature lives on the island of Habit. Every day, the creature does the exact same thing in the exact same order. That is until a small boat carrying a very small creature arrives on the island. At first, the big creature is excited to show the little creature around and explain how things are done on the island, but the small creature has his own ideas. The little creature does something different every day. It's madness, thinks the big creature. Can these two creatures learn to appreciate each other? Told with heart and humor, this is a story about being open to new ways of doing things. Mouse Seasons. Next slide. So the first new original Leo Leone picture book in nearly 30 years features the beloved mouse Frederick as he guides his fellow mice through a joyous celebration of the seasons. There's more than one way to prepare for a long winter. Gathering food and other supplies is important, but gathering the smells, sounds, and sights of a beautiful day to recall later are just as vital. How one little mouse cheers his entire community and prepares them for a full year ahead is a story that young children will love. Next. Real Santa. Join one Black family on their journey to discover what the real Santa looks like in this joyous tale celebrating identity, family, and holiday cheer from New York Times bestselling author of Bedtime Bonnet. It's not Christmas without Santa, but what does Santa truly look like? Does he match the figurines on the mantle or the faces on our favorite holiday sweaters? Does he look like you or like me? Destined to be a new classic and perfect for any child looking to see some of themselves in Santa Claus. Next slide. Hope at Sea. Hope doesn't only want to listen to her father's stories about his voyages at sea, she wants to be a part of those stories. And so, unbeknownst to her parents, she stows away on her father's 19th century merchant vessel. Join high-spirited Hope on a trip of a lifetime in this exquisitely illustrated picture book that also captures the love between a father and a child. And now over to Erica for picture books that celebrate community.
Hi, my name is Erica and I'm the coordinator for school marketing. So next slide. Okay, Snow Angel, Sand Angel. This is an unconventional winter-themed book that is also a celebration of home, family, and finding beauty in your heritage. Gorgeously illustrated by Ashley Lukashevsky, the artist behind Anti-Racist Baby, and lovingly written by Lois Ann Yamanaka. This story is sure to resonate with readers whose winter holidays are a bit on the warmer side. It includes back matter that captures the natural beauty of Hawaii and teaches children not only about local flora and fauna, but also the value of being environmentally friendly. I think Christopher Myers described it best when he said, Snow Angel, Sand Angel is about the act of imagining other people's worlds and how we can make those worlds our own and seeing how much like home a faraway place can be. Next slide. The Big Bathhouse. In this ode to bathing in bodies, join a girl and the women in her family for a day filled with joy at the traditional Japanese bathhouse. When you get to Ba-chan's house, your aunties will be waiting with their big purses and even bigger hugs. There will be wooden sandals all lined up, and you'll walk down the street. These sandals will sound like clip-clapping horses, all the way to the big bathhouse. This book promotes body positivity and celebrates bodies of all shapes and sizes. The big bathhouse is unique in its unabashed depiction of naked bodies. Next slide. Dream Street. Trisha Elam Walker, author of Nana Akuba Goes to School, which received 4-star reviews, teams up with her illustrator cousin, Equa Holmes, who is a Caldecott honor recipient, 3-time Coretta Scott King Award winner, and a New York Times bestselling illustrator. Together, they pay homage to the street they grew up on in their childhood neighborhood of Roxbury, Massachusetts. Open this book and celebrate a place where love is powerful and a nurturing community can make anything possible. It's perfect for librarians and educators looking for a way to teach children about the importance of community. It has already received a starred review from Booklist. Beautiful and uplifting, this salute to the importance of family and friends will resonate widely. Next slide. Granddude's Green Submarine. I'm thrilled to tell you about this companion to the New York Times bestselling Hey Granddude, from the unique imagination of beloved musical legend Paul McCartney. This tale is full of surprises and heartwarming family fun with stunning illustrations by the multi-talented rising star Catherine Durst. Granddude and the Chillers are ready for another globe-trotting adventure. Climb aboard Granddude's magical green submarine and join the quest to find Mandude, the Chillers' maverick of a grandma. Following her musical trail deep beneath the sea, encounters wonderful and wild creatures and things that go bumps in the depths. Next slide. Love Was Inside. From Andrew Joyner, the #1 New York Times bestselling author, comes a picture book to celebrate and remember the days we spent inside during the COVID pandemic. The joys and the hardships, the bravery and the resilience, but most of all, the love. This book, inspired by kids who found ways to stay connected to the people they loved during the pandemic, is about what an imaginative, curious, and loving little girl did when her world was turned inside out. This book is a fantastic social emotional learning tool that will address children's anxieties and fears in its discussion of the pandemic and staying connected through difficult times. Next slide. Words to Make a Friend. When a young Japanese girl moves into her new house, she is happy to see a girl playing her age, playing just outside her window in the snow. However, the language barrier presents an obstacle since the Japanese girl doesn't speak English and the American girl doesn't speak Japanese. How will these two little girls have any fun at all? As it turns out, it's not that hard when both girls are looking for a friend. What starts as a simple hello and konnichiwa becomes a day filled with fun in the snow. Each girl loves playing with the snow and making a new friend, which transcends the need to speak the same language. And by using simple words in their own language, along with a bit of charades, the girls find they have all they need to build a new snow creature. Next slide. Too Much Slime. In this humorous picture book, a community must come together to clean up when slime takes over their neighborhood. Never open the door or else. Oh no! The kids in this book open the door. Slime is everywhere. It's icky and sticky and gloppy and clunky. There's no hiding, and now it's on the move, heading for the school, ready to take over the whole town. Well, it truly does take a village to defeat this fluorescent menace. Not until every construction worker, cook, kid, and member of the marching band pitches in does the slime get divided and conquered. Until there's one tiny blob left, glurp, that fits neatly in a lunchbox. Phew, well that takes care of that, right? Wow. And over to you, Adrian.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Adrienne Weintraub, and I head up the Random House Children's Books School and Library Marketing Department. So thanks for joining us today. Our first grouping of fall middle grade titles are books we really hope become instant classics or have a feel of those classics we all love. First up, next slide, please, is Pony. First up is a new book by the author that brought us the book Wonder and through Augie and his friends and family inspired a kindness movement. Now, RJ Palacio is back with something completely different, but just as moving and thoughtful and very layered. Pony is the story of a boy on a quest to find his father, guided by a ghost and a mysterious pony. It's a profile in courage and perseverance that shows a kid taking action despite his fears and finding strength in himself, even when everything around him is crumbling. And it's a distinctly beautiful tale about the power of love and the ties that bind us across distance and time. Next slide, please. The Swag is in the Socks by Kelly J. Baptist. I hope you know Kelly from her first book, Isaiah Dunn is Not a Hero. If you don't know her yet, run out and start reading. Kelly is an author on the rise and writes with a voice and a heart that many readers are looking for right now. The Swag is in the Socks is about a Xavier Moon who, on his 12th birthday, receives a pair of funky socks and a challenge from his great uncle, Frankie Bell. It's time to bring on the swag and to speak out for what's right. This is a story about coming into your own and finding your voice. Next slide. Well, Lotería. You just heard from the author herself, Karla Valenti, so I don't have much more to say about this title other than this has been a department favorite since we first read the manuscript, and we're very happy to be working with Karla. Next slide. Long Road to the Circus. What do you get when you put together a superstar librarian named Elizabeth Bird and Caldecott-winning illustrator David Small? You get a funny, fast-paced historical novel that is all about girl power. You could hand this one to your readers that loved Kate DiCamillo, Richard Peck, or Catherine Applegate, and just look at that ostrich. How could you not pick this book up? Next slide. Just roll with it. You also heard from Lee and Veronica earlier, and I hope you added this wonderful graphic novel to your list. As they told you, through Maggie, we hear a touching novel that explores the complexity of anxiety, OCD, and learning to trust yourself and the world around you while still being fun and easy to empathize with it. Now on to Emily with some inspiring stories.
Okay, hello again. I'm going to kick it off with A Kind of Spark. In A Kind of Spark, a neurodivergent girl campaigns for a memorial when she learns that her small Scottish town used to burn witches simply because they were different. Award-winning and neurodivergent author Elle McInnell delivers an insightful and stirring debut about the European witch trials and a girl who refuses to relent in the fight for what she knows is right. A Kind of Spark is the perfect addition to collections that need more diversity and spark conversations about how to be allies and advocates for vulnerable peers and how to find value in our differences. Next slide. This Is Our Rainbow is the first LGBTQIA+ anthology for middle grade readers, featuring stories for every letter of the acronym, including realistic, fantasy, and sci-fi stories. From wind-breathing dragons to first crushes, This Is Our Rainbow features story after story of joyful, proud LGBTQIA+ representation. You will fall in love with this insightful, poignant anthology of queer fantasy, historical, and contemporary stories. Next slide. Obi is Man Enough. This is a coming-of-age story about transgender tween Obi, who didn't think being himself could cause such a splash. Obi is navigating his transition, which means moving to the boys' swim team and leaving the coach and best friends that he is comfortable with behind. And as Obi dives into a new team, things are strange, and even though he is where he truly belongs, he can't get what he left behind out of his head. With his family and friends, old and new, behind him, he's ready to tackle his biggest competition yet, himself. This is a transgender protagonist and author in a story that is sure to connect with many readers and be the window that other readers need as well. Next slide. Emotional and compassionate, this heart-wrenching middle grade debut considers homelessness from one girl's perspectives and explores its deep truths about the resounding impact of empathy. In Shelter, on top of navigating the 5th grade, Maya harbors the secret that her family is homeless, and on this particular day, she needs to travel alone in the city in the winter's biggest rainstorm without a coat or umbrella. Grab a box of tissues, but this book is absolutely wonderful. The writing is gorgeous. Next slide. In Stuck, this is a coming-of-age story about a boy who is used to flying under the radar and the classroom of kids determined to help him stand out. This is a touching story of friendship from award-winning author Jennifer Swender. Austin doesn't like standing out, but when he meets the eccentric Birdie, Austin is inspired to stand out and speak up in his work as a member of the safety squad. Jennifer Swender was a classroom teacher for many years, and she so wonderfully captures the middle grade school experience in her writing. Next slide. Whispering Alaska is an eco-focused middle grade novel. Readers will follow the story of twin sisters who move with their father to a small town for a new start after the devastating loss of their mother. In the wake of their mother's death, Nikki and Josie move from Pennsylvania to a small town in Alaska. As they settle into a new normal, they begin to become involved in a community debate that threatens the very land that they are growing to love. Author Brendan Jones' passion for Alaska shines through in this, his debut middle grade novel. Now for some fun and engaging series for middle grade readers that Shaughnessy is going to tell you about.
Hi, next slide, please. So first up is The Smartest Kid in the Universe, Book 2, Genius Camp, the second book in a new action-packed series from Chris Grabenstein, New York Times bestselling author of Escape from Mr. Lemoncello's Library. Jake McQuaid is the smartest kid in the universe, and he's back to defend his title. This time, he is heading off to a camp for geniuses sponsored by a billionaire tech mogul. But Genius Camp is not like regular camp. There are limo buses, robot polar bears, and high-tech cabins with high-tech toilets. But it isn't all fun and brain games at camp, especially when Jake goes up against the artificially intelligent virtuoso quantum computer, the smartest machine in the universe. It's boy versus bot in this epic showdown packed with s'mores, puzzles, action, adventure, and hilarious jelly bean-fueled fun. Next slide. Next, we have Honest June, a new series from Tina Wells, bestselling author and founder of Relevant Media. June has always been a people pleaser, telling harmless little lies to make her friends and family happy. She's convinced being honest about her feelings will only hurt the people she loves. Until out of nowhere, a secret fairy godmother appears to bless her with the ability to only tell the truth. Now, June has no choice but to be honest about how she feels, and the truth is, what June feels is stressed out. Middle school is no joke. Between field hockey, friend drama, and her parents' high expectations, June feels so overwhelmed that sometimes it's hard to breathe. When everything spirals out of control, will June find freedom in telling the whole truth and nothing but? Or is she destined to battle the curse for the rest of her life? Next slide. The Outlaws, Scarlet and Brown. Scarlet McCain scrapes by on bank heists and her wits. When she agrees to guide Albert Brown to safety after a horrific accident, men, dogs, and explosives are hot on their heels. As they flee together across the wilds, fighting off monstrous beasts and dodging their pursuers, Scarlet comes to realize that Albert Brown is hiding a terrible secret, and that he may be the most dangerous threat of all. Bestselling author Jonathan Stroud introduces two unlikely allies, the outlaws Scarlet and Brown, who are about to become the most notorious renegades in all that's left of Britain. Next slide. Breaking Badlands. Indira is back in the latest Tailspinners adventure, perfect for video game fans and book lovers. In this installment, the anti-heroes convince her to go undercover as a student at the School for Villains in Training, where she gets drawn into a virtual warfare competition known as the Badlands. Facing monster teachers, plotting classmates, distracting love interests, and combative old foes is all second nature to a hero like Indira. But what happens when that heroic nature is turned against her like a weapon? Can Indira get to the bottom of what's going on in Fester before this virtual battlescape spills over into a real war for ultimate control of imagination? Next slide. So we have the first helping and the second helping, Lunch Lady books 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. So the popular Lunch Lady graphic novels from National Book Award finalist Jared J. Krasowska are now in full color for the first time, with 2 adventures in 1 book. Hector, Terrence, and Dee have always wondered about their school lunch lady. What does she do when she isn't dishing out the daily special? Little do they know, Lunch Lady doesn't just serve sloppy joes, she serves justice. Whatever danger lies ahead is no match for Lunch Lady in these exciting adventures. Next slide. 5 Worlds, Book 5, The Emerald Gate. Una and her friends face their ultimate challenge in the final installment of the graphic sci-fi fantasy series that's Star Wars meets Avatar, The Last Airbender. Una, Jax, and Ansu travel to a treacherous world where Una must light the last beacon to save the 5 worlds. Unfortunately, the journey to lighting it on this strange, watery planet is the most dangerous yet. Can she count on her friends, or will a terrible betrayal mean the 5 worlds will be lost to evil forever? And next up, Natalie will share middle grade nonfiction titles.
Hi again. First up is Yummy. Cake, cookies, ice cream. Yes, these are all some of our favorites. But do you know where they come from? Yummy, A History of Desserts is an exciting new nonfiction graphic novel that explores the origins of desserts, sharing the cultural influences that led to each creation. In this nonfiction history, narrated by Food Sprites, debut author Victoria Grace Elliott explores who first thought to freeze ice cream, or when people began making sweet pastry shells to encase their fruity fillings. And bonus, this fun book does more than just share history. It makes you a part of it. Recipes throughout the book make it both informative and interactive, giving readers a fun and immersive experience. Recognize. In the stunning follow-up to the talk, Conversations about Race, Love, and Truth, award-winning Black authors and artists come together to create a moving anthology collection celebrating Black love, Black creativity, Black resistance, and Black life. Essays, poems, short stories, and historical excerpts blend with a full-color 8-page insert of spellbinding art to capture the pride, prestige, and jubilation that is being Black in America. A starred review from Kirkus describes Recognize as a multifaceted, sometimes disheartening, yet consistently enriching primer on the unyielding necessity of those 3 words, Black Lives Matter. Next slide, please. Killers of the Flower Moon. This essential book introduces middle grade readers to the reign of terror against the Osage people, one of history's most ruthless and shocking crimes. In this young reader's adaptation, David Grann revisits the series of murders of Osage Native Americans that went unsolved in the early 20th century. The book is a searing indictment of the callousness and prejudice toward Native Americans that allowed the murders to occur for so long. The book explores racism and exploitation, making it a fantastic recommendation for any young readers with an interest in social justice. Excitingly, there is a film adaptation in the works, so be sure to read Killers of the Flower Moon before you watch. And RBG's Brave and Brilliant Women. This collection of compact biographies was selected in collaboration with Ruth Bader Ginsburg and includes an introduction written by the iconic Supreme Court Justice herself. RBG's Brave and Brilliant Women is a roster of Jewish women who, like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, did not accept what the world told them they should be. Instead, they dreamed big, worked hard, and forged their own paths to become who they deserve to be. This inspiring, accessible, and engaging work of nonfiction profiles women from biblical times to the modern day and offers lessons on empowerment to readers of all backgrounds. And over to Adrienne.
Okay, so first up for YA, we have 3 fiction titles. First one, next slide, is ALMA PRESSES play. Tina did a wonderful job in the beginning of our time together telling you about her novel in verse. This accessible format with a backdrop of New York in the 80s and the way Tina addresses social issues makes it a perfect book group read. Next slide. You'd Be Home by Now is the new book by Kathleen Glasgow. You might know her from her book, Girl in Pieces. Inspired by the American classic, Our Town, Kathleen tells the story of a modern town and the secretive lives people live within it. It includes a deep look at the opioid crisis and the lives of both addicts and their loved ones. And it's the story of a girl figuring out life in all its pain and beauty and struggle and joy. Next slide. In The Year I Stopped Trying by Katie Heaney takes on the tremendous pressures teens today are under to perform in academic settings. Mary is a good student. She never gets in trouble, and she is searching for the meaning of life. The first time she forgot her history assignment, she thought the world would end, but it doesn't. The teacher doesn't even say anything to her, so she asks herself, why is she trying so hard? What if she stops? And she does. This is perfect for fans of The Perks of Being a Wallflower, I'll Give You the Sun, and it's kind of a funny story. Next, we're going to move on to Emily with some thrillers.
Yes, everyone loves a good thriller, especially in the fall. Lies Like Wildfire is an intense, high-stakes story about 5 friends and the deadly secret that could send their lives up in flames. Perfect for fans of Karen McManus and E. Lockhart. In Gap Mountain, California, everyone knows about fire season. When Hannah and her best friends accidentally spark an enormous and deadly wildfire, their instinct is to lie to the police and the fire investigators. This was an in-house favorite, and in the spirit of the title, this is one of those thrillers that will spread like wildfire throughout your school or library as teens pass it to their friends. Next slide. As Good as Dead. This is it. This is the highly anticipated edge-of-your-seat conclusion to the addictive A Good Girl's Guide to Murder series that reads like your favorite true crime podcast or show. When Pip starts to find connections between her possible stalker and a local serial killer, Pip knows that there's only one choice: to find the person threatening her town, including herself, or be as good as dead. This is awesome for book clubs and has amazing crossover appeal to get everyone talking, and with book 3 coming in the fall, it's the perfect binge read. Next slide. No Beauties or Monsters. For readers who love speculative fiction, No Beauties or Monsters is the perfect thriller sci-fi light novel. Riley returned to 29 Palms after her father's death. There were a lot of memories there buried in the sand of the Mojave Desert, and lots of secrets too. With her friend Lily missing and whispers of a killer on the loose, something is definitely not right. This is a riveting, multifaceted thriller mystery that will fly off the shelves. Next slide. You Will Be the Death of Me. This is from the Queen of Thrillers, Karen McManus. She is back with a brand new pulse-pounding thriller. This is Ferris Bueller's Day Off with murder. Need I say more? 3 old friends relive an epic ditch day that goes horribly and fatally wrong. Next slide. And we have Fly By Night. Fly By Night is a truly exciting addition to the thriller collections with a thriller graphic novel. This is an amazing mystery filled with strange creatures, high school drama, and family, darkly illustrated, and shows us that monsters are all around us. Reading a thriller in a graphic novel format brought the experience to a whole new level, and I know your readers will feel the same. And over to Erica, who's going to tell you about some sci-fi fantasy.
Thanks, Emily. Okay, so Skin of the Sea. This is book 1 in the unforgettable fantasy duology inspired by West African mythology, in which a mermaid takes on the gods. Simi once prayed to the gods, but now she serves them as a mami wada, a mermaid, collecting the souls of those who die at sea and blessing their journeys back home. When a boy is thrown overboard, Simi does the unthinkable. She saves his life, but unbeknownst to her, this act goes against an ancient decree. To protect the other mami wada, Simi must journey to the supreme creator to make amends. But all is not as it seems. Next slide. Titanic. This is the 3rd book in the epic Skyward series the New York Times bestselling author Brandon Sanderson brought us. Spensa has flown through the sky and voyaged past the stars in her quest to save humankind from the forces that threaten to destroy it. But now she must navigate a dangerous new frontier, which not one person has returned from alive. The mysterious realm known as the Nowhere. In this eerie interdimensional world, time and space have come loose from the rules of reality, and bands of rogue pirates fight for control of relics called mementos, without which a human trapped in the Nowhere may begin to forget their very identity. Pursued by threatening, faceless beings, and with her sense of self fading by the day, escaping the Nowhere might be Spensa's most challenging battle yet, but she is determined to make it home alive. Next slide. Aurora's End. Prepare for the thrilling finale in the epic best-selling Aurora Cycles series. What happens when you ask a bunch of misfits to save the galaxy from an ancient evil? When we last left Squad 312, an intergalactic battle raged and an ancient superweapon threatened to obliterate the Earth. Everything that could go wrong did, but as it turns out, not all endings are endings, and the team has one last chance to rewrite theirs. Next slide. Spells Like Teen Spirit. This is the final installment in the hilarious, action-packed Babysitter's Coven series. Ever since Esme met Cassandra Heaven and discovered the truth about their shared legacy, that their sitters, supernaturally gifted teens tasked with protecting the innocent from evil, her life has been moving at 90 miles per hour. During the day, she chases wild toddlers, and at night, she employs a different skill set for a different kind of demon, literal ones. It's an incredibly funny, supernatural, light, witty read. Hand this to readers looking for accessible escapism. Next slide. The Excalibur Curse. The gripping conclusion to the acclaimed Arthurian fantasy trilogy from New York Times bestselling author Kirsten White finds Guinevere questioning everything: friends and enemies, good and evil, and most of all, herself. She is determined to set things right, whatever the cost, defeating a rising evil, remake a kingdom, and undo the mistakes of the past, even if it means destroying herself. In this epic conclusion, Guinevere explores her inner strength, and her story is sure to stand out to lovers of the genre. Next slide. Jessie Zbarsky, author of Witchlight, is back with a new graphic novel. Preet is magic, Valissa is not. Everyone in their village has magic in their bones, and Preet is the strongest of them all. Without any power of her own, how can Valissa ever be worthy of Preet's love? When their home is attacked, Valissa has a chance to prove herself, but that means leaving Preet behind. On her own for the first time, Preet breaks the village's most sacred laws and is rejected from the only home she's ever known and sent into a new world. Divided by different paths, insecurities, and distance, will Valissa and Preet be able to find their way back to each other? This is a beautiful story of two women who are focused on proving they are meant to be together so much that they end up hurting each other in the process. This gorgeous graphic novel is an LGBTQ+ romance about young love and how it can grow into something so strong that no matter what obstacles get in their way. Okay, back to you, Emily.
Thank you. And we're going to bring it on home with some nonfiction YA. Defiant is a fight for the equal rights continues. Defiant takes a critical look at the strides and struggles of the past in this revelatory and moving memoir about a young Black man growing up in the South during the heart of the Civil Rights Movement. Born in 1946 in Mansfield, Louisiana, Wade Hutton comes of age against the backdrop of the Civil Rights Movement. This powerful memoir reveals the struggles, joys, love, and ongoing resilience that it took to grow up Black in segregated America, and the lessons that carry over to our fight for a better future. Wade is the co-editor of the anthologies We Rise, We Resist, We Raise Our Voices, and The Talk, and we are so excited to be publishing his amazing memoir. Next slide. Disability Visibility, adapted for young adults. According to the last census, 1 in 5 people in the United States lives with a disability. Some are visible, some are hidden, but all are underrepresented in media and popular culture. Now, just in time for the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, activist Alice Wong brings together an urgent, galvanizing collection of personal essays by contemporary disabled writers, a groundbreaking collection of first-person writing on the joys and challenges of the modern disability experience. Disability Visibility brings together the voices of activists, authors, lawyers, politicians, artists, and everyday people whose daily lives are, in the words of playwright Neil Marcus, an art, an ingenious way to live. Next slide. On Top of Glass. The Summer Olympics might be this year, but everyone loves a good figure skating story. And On Top of Glass is an insightful memoir from a figure skating champion about her life as a bisexual professional athlete. Karina Manta's memoir covers her life both as a teen navigating high school and her career as a professional figure skater. It's a story about her struggle with body image in a sport that prizes delicate femininity. It's a story about panic attacks and first crushes and all the crushes that follow. And it's a story about growing up. Next slide. The Story of More, adapted for young adults. This young adult adaptation of acclaimed geochemist and geobiologist Hope Jaren's highly respected nonfiction work is the perfect book for those interested in learning about climate change and how they can contribute to creating a more sustainable future. A perfect read for your budding environmental activists. Next slide. The Woman All Spies Fear. This is an inspiring true story, perfect for fans of hidden figures, about an American woman who pioneered code breaking in World War I and II, but was only recently recognized for her extraordinary contributions. Elizabeth Smith Friedman had a rare talent for spotting patterns and solving puzzles. These skills led her to become one of the most top crypt analysts, in American during both World War I and World War II. Amy Butler Greenfield is an award-winning historian and novelist who aims to shed light on this female pioneer of the STEM community. And that does it for our fall 2021 preview. Please visit us on rhteacherslibrarians.com to download free resources and learn about our titles. Everything you heard about today is available on NetGalley. And don't forget to sign up for our newsletter and to keep up with new books, authors, resources, and events. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you so much. And a huge thank you to all of our panelists today, especially the wonderful team at Random House Children's Books. All those titles sound amazing. Tomorrow, all attendees will receive an email containing links to today's slides, title list, certificate of completion, and video recording. For more about Booklist webinars, be sure to visit booklistonline.com/webinars, where you can view archives of past webinars and register for upcoming ones like those you see here. If you're not yet a subscriber, pair the print reading experience with the convenience of online access at booklistonline.com and lock in print, online, digital, and archive access by taking advantage of this special webinar offer to get Booklist for only $75. Booklist's third annual Graphic Novels in Libraries Month is officially here. We'll be celebrating throughout July with webinars, author, illustrator panels, and a Read Graphic sweepstakes, podcasts, and of course, our Guide to Graphic Novels issue, which is now free and open to everyone on our website. Go to booklistonline.com to start reading now. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, and one more huge thank you to our wonderful authors and panelists, and our sponsors, Random House Children's Books. This concludes today's webinar. See you next time.